right, so today we have Zach Lloyd, founder, CEO at Warp, which you can find at warp.dev. Some descriptions from their website. Warp is the intelligent terminal. It combines AI and your dev team's knowledge in one fast, intuitive terminal. And it's also AI that transforms your terminal into a powerful productivity tool. And with that, Zach, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
All right, so the terminal. I use the
Yeah.
terminal, but I also use VS Code. But obviously, you probably heard the buzzword these days is vibe coding.
Yes.
So the terminal is kind of a throwback. So walk us through your thinking of why the terminal.
Why a terminal? So Warp Warp started actually before LLMs came out, and the original idea was that there's two main tools that developers spend their days in. So there's the code editor and there's the command line. And the command line is a place where developers will do a lot of different things, whether it's build, test, run their code, it's interact with their clouds, it's write internal scripts. So it's a really versatile tool and it's very powerful if you can get good at using it, but it's a big pain to learn. It has a really hard learning curve. And I would say most developers just like never actually get good enough at using it to really get a ton of power out of it. So the original concept behind Warp was let's build a more usable, more approachable, and also more powerful terminal UX. And it felt doable because it's a user experience that hadn't really changed in the last 40 years. Like if you open up most terminals, not Warp at this point, they look exactly like they looked 40 years ago. It's just like a black screen with a green cursor. And there's something cool about that, but it's also very like kind of intimidating. And I think it doesn't feel like a modern app. So that was like the starting point for why the terminal, and then why the intelligent terminal, or why like what it's turned into, which is much more than a terminal. Like year and a half into working on Warp, LLMs came out, and we realized pretty quickly that it was for people using the command line going to be a pretty useful technology to integrate. And so we started off doing the thing that a lot of companies did, a lot of products, like we put a sort of AI side panel chat bar in. But then we realized actually there's a much more powerful integration that's possible with the terminal, which is what Warp is today, where it's a terminal where you can either enter commands like a normal terminal, or you can just interact with it in natural language in English and tell it to do things, ask it questions about your system, ask it questions about your code, debug production issues. And so, yeah, at this point, I actually think the terminal is a very, very cool interface for doing things with AI, and that's where we are today.
So as you mentioned, many of us have met developers that love the terminal and
Yeah.
that have spent time customizing uh, their environment, and they will show you all the superpowers they have,
Yeah.
and they will ask you, I don't understand why not everyone is using this, but then they show you all of the things that went into the customization. And then,
Yeah, it's a lot of
and then
work.
you go, that's the answer why not
Yeah.
everyone is doing this, right? Uh, so,
It's a
so,
lot of work. Yeah.
so I guess at this point, why use the terminal at all if you can be in, I don't know, a browser, and then now with all these protocols for agents, right? So MCP and others, use that as your essentially your terminal.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the short answer is like at some point you're gonna have to like actually interact with the terminal, no matter what tool you're using. You know, most of the internet, in some sense or another, is just running terminal commands. So when you make a Docker container, it's just a series of terminal commands. You push that out through Kubernetes, it's running a server on the internet that's terminal commands. If you use Git, it's terminal commands. And so it's kind of like, you can abstract away a bunch of that through a UI layer on top of the terminal.
That
Um,
looks like an LLM
yeah,
chat
it looks
interface.
like it could look like whatever. It could look
Yeah.
like, a Git UI in the IDE. A lot of things will abstract on top of it, but ultimately there's actually power in just using the command line itself, in that um, if you're using a UI on top of the terminal, you're missing a bunch of what the terminal does super well, which is the terminal is scriptable, whereas UIs are not necessarily scriptable. So anything you do in the terminal, you can automate. The terminal is composable, meaning like you can very easily take the output of one app, which is text, and feed it into the output of another. So you can sort and filter and do all sorts of analysis because all the apps interoperate. You can, it has like an infinitely extensible UI. Like if you think about the way that terminal commands work, it's like a command followed by a flag or an argument, and that flag can take infinite values because it's text, whereas like you can't have like infinite drop down lists in UIs. And so there are all these intrinsic things that actually make, for certain types of tasks, at least, it preferable, I think, to use the terminal. And so Warp's approach to this is to make those interactions much more streamlined and usable and accessible rather than to abstract them away entirely. Um, but yeah, I do agree. It's like you can avoid it a bunch if you want to, but I would argue that you shouldn't. You can actually get more done if you use it.
So are there also, I guess, the other question is, are there security reasons for staying in the terminal?
Um,
At least, for example, if you're using the terminal on your laptop, there are certain things that the, that you're allowed to do, not allowed to do for security reasons. So you don't have to think about that anymore. As opposed to if you start mucking around with this LLM integrations,
yeah,
we all have seen lists of MCP servers. They're running into the thousands.
it's
How many of those are vetted, right? So,
I think so that's totally, the terminal is in some sense tried and true. It's like you have SSH, you have command line apps. It's a very like kind of clear environment. I feel like MCPs are a bit of the Wild
wild,
West
wild west.
of the Wild West at the moment. Um,
There's no
eh,
vetting, I mean,
yeah,
I guess
using
if the MCP server is put out by a company, this is an MCP server to integrate with our apps, maybe you feel a little safe about that, right? So,
Yeah, like the way I look at MCP is it's kind of like an API layer for LLMs to interact with. And so, um, just like most companies will put out APIs and then they'll put out CLIs as well for people who want to do interactive work with them. I think that they'll put out MCPs as well for LLMs to interact. It's just kind of like to me, it's a more convenient way of packaging up an API into a product that an LLM can interact with. So I think it's like a new category of thing that will be its own kind of niche use.
so I think I'm sold on the terminal, but to some extent, Zach, is this a bit of a generational challenge for you? Because these young developers,
Oh,
they may not have grown up with terminals, right? So
it's uh it's generational. It's also like I think warp and terminals
persona wise.
it's just persona based. So it's like we tend to get first of all, we tend to skew more towards pro developers rather than like people who are just getting into development. We also skew
Data scientists and Python people, right? So
data, backend, SRE, DevOps,
yeah.
people working with Docker and Kubernetes also use it um, more heavily. Like it's not, I would say we're not like competing with people who are building apps using like Bolt or Lovable or V0 or just like very front end heavy. That's not necessarily our target, although Warp can do that kind of thing as
And also
well.
for
Yeah.
our listeners who don't use the terminal is not just for development, obviously,
Yep.
right? So I
Terminal is
think
like it's a
Yeah.
general interface into your computer. And so I don't know, we'll get people who are setting up sort of like they want to work on a Raspberry Pi or something. And so that's the only way to interface with it. And so there is a super wide variety of things that you can do in the terminal. It's basically a text-based interface for controlling your computer or your cloud. And so the applications of it are extremely wide. We get people from all across the board using it.
And to be clear, it's a separate terminal from the one that comes with your computer, right?
Correct. So yeah, if you are using Mac, it's like you would use this in place of the terminal app. If you're using Windows, you would use this in place of Windows terminal. And, within the terminal, you run different shells. So there's like all this kind of complexity around how the system works. And Warp will generally work with any of those. So you can generally just download it, open it up, and start using it in place of any other terminal.
So if I download Warp and I'm attached or familiar with certain tools that I use on the terminal, I don't know, as some shell scripting
Yep,
language or VI or Emacs,
that all just works.
that just all works. All right.
That
So
all
then,
just works. Yeah. Yeah.
what is so then now I'm on the Warp terminal. So what you're saying is I can also treat that as like a chat interface, like for an LLM.
That's exactly right. So, and this is what I think the future is. Like, I actually don't necessarily think terminals are the future or even IDEs are the future. I think that the future way that development is going to work is through essentially developers through language telling their computers to do things for them. And so that could be fix this bug for me. It could be here are some mocks, build this feature for me. It could be my server is spewing errors, help me understand what changed recently or what resource I'm running out of. And the way that developers have traditionally done those types of tasks is you either open up a terminal or an IDE, depending on what you're doing, and you manually like write a bunch of code or issue a bunch of commands. And I think that that's all going to transform pretty quickly into you asking a bunch of questions or telling the tool in English to try to do things for you and having it sort of collaborate or autonomously even do a bunch of those things. So I think that's actually the direction that we're going and sort of the terminal versus IDE versus whatever you want to call it is all going to evolve to support that new workflow.
But then, as you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, obviously the terminal can do more things than an IDE or a notebook in some ways, right?
Yep.
As a base, right? So, and I think the people who are familiar with terminals know that the ones that don't, how do you educate them?
It's a really tough question for us, just from a like business standpoint and product standpoint. When you call a product a terminal, it comes with like a bunch of preconceived notions and limits of like what do you use a terminal for? And if for people who know, that's fine, that's great. There's lots of people looking for terminals. One of the challenges that we have at Warp is that it can do so much more than just what like a normal terminal can do. And so we're having questions internally on like, do we try to expand what the definition of a terminal is and try to educate the public on like, hey, oh, you're writing some code or making an app, use a terminal, or do we try to change what we call Warp, call it more of an IDE,
Well,
which
it's more
yeah,
like a full stack end-to-end thing in the sense that, like you
yeah,
said, right? So if I'm on Warp, I can do vibe coding, and then
you can vibe code.
I
Yeah,
can generate the program, and then now
yeah.
I can set up a Docker container, or if there's some pipeline that needs to be part of that program or some deployment setup, I can do it right there. I don't know if the vibe coding tools even think of that because basically what they're trying to get you to is the code,
Yes.
right? So
100%. So that is one cool thing about being the terminal is that it is, in some sense, the foundational tool that goes across all of these different activities. So from setting up new projects to coding them to deploying them to monitoring them in production and firefighting them. You use it for everything because it really is just a way of controlling your computer. And so it has all of this great surface area that goes beyond the more focused, like, let me just, ask Bolt to build me, like an e-commerce app or something. You can do that, but you can do much more. And that's cool, but it's like it has this product like positioning challenge that is like an interesting thing that we are navigating right now to like broaden people's horizons on what you can use it for.
Uh, Obviously, I mean, I guess just to clarify for our listeners, right? So
Yep.
when we talk of terminal, they might think that, okay, so what these guys are describing is things I'm doing on my laptop, but I'm assuming
Yep.
that if I have to do something on cloud, you can help me with that too from the terminal.
Totally. So there's just different ways you can do it, but we can SSH, like, so we can remote control any machine that has access. One thing
And
we don't,
dude,
yeah, sorry.
even just the SSH, getting that to work can be a problem for people, right?
Yeah, so it's if you are building something that is a remote server, the one of the primary ways that you're going to control it, or at least get it set up so that you can automate control of it. Because I do think ultimately what you want is like sort of an automated, whether it's through Docker or Kubernetes or whatever. But having the ability to go into and control a remote machine is super important as if you're building something. And yeah, Warp does that.
And so then, so right now, Zach, if you were to describe uh, the top three ways people use Warp,
Yep.
what would they be?
Yeah, so it's almost all developers. I'll just frame it like
Mhm.
that. People use Warp for sort of anything to do with like source code management. So sort of like Git, again, I don't know if everyone will
Yeah.
be familiar with this, but like making changes to source code is like a probably one of the top things people do. A number two thing would probably be any kind of change that's related to production. So this would be setting up Docker, Kubernetes, deploying servers. Number three would be probably just straight up coding. So it's similar to Claude Code in that respect, where you can just, I guess you call it vibe coding. I'm kind of vibe coding is not my favorite term, but you can call it vibe coding, where it's just you instruct Warp to build something for you, or to make a change, or to, fix a bug, and it will create a plan for you. It will show you the diffs. It will let you edit the diffs as you do it. So those are probably the top three things I would say people do is like code management, production management, and coding.
So all three of them, what percentage of people are using Claude in kind of the LLM kind of way, by just chatting with Claude, with Warp, I mean.
So with Warp, so it's a great question. So
Like,
we have a lot
I
of
want to
users.
create a Docker image for this,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah.
So we have a lot of users who just use Warp as a normal terminal. I think around a third of our users are using it more as like the natural language, just like talk to the terminal to do things. And by the way, you can literally just like talk to it. We have voice input. Um, I would say that's another like challenge for anyone who's in this space, especially with like our approach, uh, where you have to get developers to change the way that they've been doing things, and especially if you're, I think that kind of the longer you've been doing
Or even
development,
Zach,
yeah, yeah,
expand their toolbox, right? Because
expand their
basically
toolbox. It's a new tool.
the
Yeah.
thing about the command line is that once you get comfortable, then in many ways you get kind of rigid in how you do things because this sequence of things works.
Yes.
I know that it works, so I'm going to do it this way. But I think the power of this is maybe you become more versatile.
Absolutely. I think that's the best way to look at it too, is that it's a it's a new tool, a very, very powerful new tool. You have to actually like sort of intend to use it in some sense. Although we try to make that easy for people. Uh, it's a as a tool, you get various levels of proficiency in using it. So it's kind of like if you want to learn how to do Vim or Emacs, you got to put a little bit of work in to learn the keyboard shortcuts and all of that. When working with AI and LLMs as a developer, the skill is in prompting. So it's like, how do you tell it what to do? There's skill in providing the context. There's like a little bit of like an art to the back and forth. The AI is a little bit today. It's
And
kind of like a
I assume you
savant,
I assume you guys track my history so that if there was a prompt last week that really saved the day for me, I can find that, right?
You can do it like that. You can save it so you can repeat it later. Like there's all these things that make it easier. So you can set up rules so that you're not repeating yourself around context. You can save prompts. So it's like, for instance, I have a save prompt that I use every time I want to merge our main branch into develop. And so it's like I don't do that workflow manually anymore. I just tell AI to do it through a saved prompt and it will resolve the merge conflicts for me. And it's freaking cool. But like I had to do some small amount of work to get that to be repeatably useful for me. So there's skill in it. There's like intent in it. And then there's also just like uh, I don't think you can just go tell a developer to be like, start using AI in your workflow. There needs to be a moment where they see the value of it. And so the way that we've gone from, you know, almost no one using AI in Warp to like, so let's say a third of our users regularly using AI in Warp is by surfacing AI at useful times. And so like a great example of this is say you have a compiler error. Well, Warp can just surface like, hey, here's the fix for you or you're missing a dependency. And this
Oh,
is like one of the most
this is happening. This is happening now.
this is happening now. Yeah. So it's like, for instance, oh, it'll print out like you have the wrong version of Python installed or you're missing this package. That's like a real headache for a developer. Like it's like my least favorite part of the job. And Warp will show you something that says, hey, do you want us to just fix this for you? And a lot of times developers will ignore that because they're like, oh, I don't want Clippy or whatever in my terminal. And that's Microsoft's fault from back in the day. But it actually works now where it can diagnose, fix, and just save you. Honestly, like we get a lot of people being like, this saved me hours, this saved me days, this allowed me to build something or fix something I wouldn't know how to do. But you have to experience it before you believe it. Otherwise, I think developers are very highly disposed to think that it's hype or vaporware or like gonna like get in their way or take their job or something when I think the reality is it's a very useful tool. That's how I would look at it right now, at least.
So on the UX side, so there's the basically if you're hardcore, you just use the terminal directly.
Yeah.
If you're not, if you're on the opposite side, you chat with the terminal.
Yep.
And then is there an in between kind of like, I don't know, autocomplete kind of
Yeah. So
arrangement?
that's right. That's the other modality of AI that's very useful right now. There's actually another one too. So I would say you can use raw commands. That's like the lowest level. I'm hardcore, fine.
And there's still
There's
a there's still a value in Warp because it sets everything up for you, right?
Yeah, and exactly like out of the gate, it's all ready to go with that. And then there's completions, which I think is the first UX that really caught fire for AI is like, and this is like if you look at Cursor, like Cursor's got
Or
great code
GitHub
completions.
Copilot, right?
Or Copilot. It's such a good UX for AI because there's no cost when it gets it wrong. And so you're not wasting any time with it. It's so easy to accept it. Then one layer up from that, there's this sort of interactive chat mode where you have to be present and interact with the AI. And then there's the thing that's coming, which this is actually what Warp is building more and more towards, which is an agentic mode of using AI where you give more and more autonomy to the AI off of an initial prompt. And, some of the time it can do the whole thing for you. Some of the time it can do 80% and will loop you in when it needs your help, but you don't have to sit there watching it. And so I actually think all of those modalities are useful. And I think over time we'll move more and more towards the autonomous ones. I think it's actually happening pretty quickly. Like
So
it's kind of yeah.
what's real now on the agentic autonomous side for Warp?
So what's real now for Warp is you can there's a mode of using Warp where you can grant it autonomy. And the way it works today, and this is changing shortly, but the way it works today is if you want to go into autonomous mode, first you work with it in a pairing mode to create a plan. And so the plan is basically a very detailed prompt where we feel like if we pass the plan into a model that it's going to execute the plan, it can do a good enough job that it can operate autonomously. You don't have to do that. Like you can just be like, I want to
Which,
set it to autonomous.
on a practical level,
Yeah.
Zach, does that mean that, I can kick off this thing autonomously and on the side I'm working on other terminals?
Yeah, so it's actually the terminal is a great UX for this. So you can just split panes or make a new tab. You can have one thing running, two things running, you can have five things running. There's a
So everything that you know how you've
yeah.
you've run into these kind of terminal gods in the past where they have like
Yeah, exactly.
so all of that is available on Warp as well.
That's all available on Warp. You can have, I mean, at some point your computer is going to fall over if you're all
Yeah,
doing it locally,
yeah.
but you could do it remotely too. And like the way that we're envisioning this, the modern developer, what they're going to do is like they're going to have 10 of these things running. They're all going to be in different split panes. You might not even have to have it open. Like you can look at it if you want. There's going to be a management UX where, hey, if one of them hits an error or needs your feedback, it pops a notification to you and says, hey, I'm about to make this code change, but your prompt was ambiguous. Can you help me figure out what you want? And you'll hop in and you'll fix it. And so you'll be doing this as a developer. You'll be doing it across multiple coding projects, but also multiple parts of the developer lifecycle from setup. You'll be debugging things in production. So I think it's going to be like you're going to be like a maestro or a conductor or an orchestrator where all these things are helping you do your work, which is pretty cool. A little scary, but very cool, I think.
By the way, when you're using Warp AI,
Yep.
is the I assume the AI is in the cloud,
The
or
AI is in the cloud, although
it's not
people are
Olama local, right?
so that's actually our top feature request. Our number one overall user request right now is to support local models or self-hosted models.
And the
I think
model,
we'll
the
do this.
model, the
Yeah.
models are yours, and you took some open weights model, fine-tuned it, or have done
We
something
mostly
specifically for the things that people
for
use
terminal.
WAR for. Yeah.
So most of the heavy lifting of models are foundation models from Anthropic, OpenAI, Gemini, like Google. We we do some amount of like fine tuning on top of that for like terminal use case,
The main
and we
thing,
have some.
the
Yeah,
main thing, Zach, is that I
yeah,
think what the model would need is context, right? So,
correct,
like, here's Ben. This is what Ben normally does, and then this is the things that he uses. These are the libraries, and so on and so forth, right? So
exactly.
how does it get context?
Right. So great question. So there's a few ways. So one is it can gather context interactively. And so a good example of
Oh,
this
over
would
time.
be, or just even like in the course of a conversation. So
Okay.
like, let's say to take a specific example, let's say I'm asking AI to create a PR for me, a pull request. So this is a very simple example. It'll run git status. It will run git diff. It will look at rules that I have. And so the rules might be like, um, use this PR template. So the number one way that it can get context is just by running terminal commands and reading their output. So that's super simple. Then there's a layer that's more advanced, which is like this, like I said about rules, or like you can set up context beforehand. It can get context through MCP, so Model Context Protocol, which is, do you know MCP?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Model Context Protocol. So this is this Anthropic standard where you can register servers that will essentially act as APIs that the LLM can call. And
I
then
guess one
yeah,
one question, Zach, is let's say I'm in a company, right? So and
yep,
and obviously in a company there's the leads and there's the senior developers, and then I'm one of these new developers, right? So, and I
Yep.
start interacting with it, and then what I wanted to do if I were in Google is for it to kind of figure out what is Sanjay Gemawat and Jeff Dean, what are
Yeah.
they doing? What are they doing?
So we're building. So this isn't live yet, but this to me is like the dream where it's
Yeah,
like if you're all on a team together
yeah,
and you can leverage the knowledge of the team. So we
yeah,
have a
exactly.
version
Yeah,
of
yeah,
this,
yeah, yeah.
which in Warp is something that we call Warp Drive, and it's basically a shared team knowledge store. And so today, the way this works is you add things to it manually. And so like a simple example would be like, hey, here's a command for doing a deploy. Here's a notebook for how you firefight. Here's a useful prompt for setting up a project. So you contribute those things to Warp Drive, and then they go into an embedding space where when the LLM is looking for answers to your questions, it can do a sort of semantic search and figure out like, hey, has anyone from your team contributed knowledge around this? I think this gets one level cooler if you can do it passively, so that a canonical use case would be like, I'm in the middle of doing a firefight and I see some server error that I've never seen before, and I'm like, oh crap, like I don't know if we.
And if you have, and if there's specific processes, so I'm thinking, for example, incident response playbooks,
Yep.
right? So then it just knows that somehow, right?
Yeah, exactly. So and I think this is one of the key things for products in this space is like, how do you build up the context of the team, especially if you're trying to build an enterprise product, which Warp eventually, that's really what we're trying to do is help developers at work. Having that corpus built up of like, here are the best practices for our team, here are our procedures, here's how prior errors were resolved, here's how our coding standards, getting all of that stuff into context for the AI to use is like, I think going to be one of the key things that whoever sort of gets the most market share in this space figures out how to do the best. It's something that we're looking like we've invested in already, or are continuing to push on.
So in terms of persona right now, is it mostly developers or what percentage are DevOps, SRE, those kind of people? Yeah.
I would say so. If you look at a breakdown, it's pretty mixed. So our single biggest user cohort is backend developers, so people who self-identify as backend. After that, it's full stack developers. Then it's DevOps, SRE. Then it's front end. Then it's data. Then we have engineering managers. We have students. But the single biggest cohort
So
is
you
people who
run the
self-identify
gamut
as back.
from like people, doing JavaScript, Python, TypeScript,
Everything. Yeah.
Kubernetes, right?
Yeah, but I would say that's our best user is like Kubernetes, Docker, microservices,
Well,
backend debugging.
they're the command line people.
Yeah, the command line people. So like it makes sense that that's who is most deeply engaged.
And right now, most of them are using it like single license, divorced from their team.
Yes, and that's like from a business perspective, we would love to crack that nut, but like
But do you
yeah.
have an actual enterprise offering with all the things we just
We
talked
do.
about?
Yeah, yeah. And we have a bunch of like I don't know who I'm allowed to say logo wise, but a bunch of really, really amazing companies that have enterprise licenses with Warp where they
But
do deploy it for
this
their
whole,
team.
in an enterprise, I need better context, and
So yeah, so the main drivers on the enterprise business are they tend to be things related to data privacy, security, choice of LLM, enriched context. So these places have internal tools that they want, like
compliance. Yeah,
compliance.
yeah.
And so, yeah, those are the best customers for us to get. But we also have, thousands of paying just small teams and individuals who just like self-serve, use credit cards, pay for it.
So because software development, vibe coding, and
Yep.
now back end development and terminals, they're all using LLMs.
Yes.
Does that mean basically software developers basically need access to the cloud to do anything. You know
Yeah,
what I
it's
mean? Before you could do a few things on your laptop, right? So while you're on a plane, right? So but now, hey, I need to do something, but I'm on a flight, but I can't connect to Warp and the LLM, and so therefore I'm useless right now. Yeah.
I mean, you can use it. You'll just feel like, and it'll work as a normal terminal with
Yeah.
no dependencies. You'll just feel slower. It's like that's how I feel. I get very frustrated when someone takes away a tool that I like am used to that's an online tool. It still works, but I don't know. I think we're not far from a future where internet is pretty much everywhere. So I'm okay with that.
So what would you like to see on the foundation model front in the next 6 to 12 months? Like what's missing or what's not as good and what kind of improvements
Yeah, the
selfishly from your
this
perspective? Yeah.
single biggest thing that would have a major impact would be increasing the useful context window. The
My
number
God,
one,
it's huge now, man. It's not enough.
not enough. Like the number one thing, I mean, it's enough. It just depends on your application or like what
Yeah.
you're doing. But
Yeah.
like if you're working on existing real code bases,
Oh yeah.
which is what we're going for, Anthropic's at like 200K tokens and Gemini Pro now is like at 1 million tokens. Uh, that's good, but like there's still all sorts of stuff that we need to do to work around those context limitations and do RAG appropriately. And what ends up happening from a user experience perspective is like you'll be very deep into some hard task and then it starts forgetting what you were talking about. And it's like come on, like why are you doing that? We were figuring this out together, and then it's you have to summarize and truncate and do all these strategies to fit the right context in that if the context windows were bigger, and I'm pretty, I mean, I'm not saying anything surprising, they will get bigger. It's going to get vastly more powerful because context is the big limiter. I would also love to see reduced latency. Like I actually think these models have gotten slower, especially the ones that are higher quality. And like unfortunately, I think there's a trend towards them getting even slower with the reasoning models. That's okay if you're doing
Yeah. How much reasoning do you need for I mean, do the reasoning models give you an edge at all for the types
To
of
me,
things
it's a
that,
little it's a little bit on the line between like hype and usefulness right now, if I'm being totally
I
honest.
mean,
Like,
for
yeah.
the types of things that the warp users need, right?
So where we have the reasoning models is if you're doing something complicated with code or something complicated with production, we use them as a plan generator. We don't use them as a and then like the way it works is you use the reasoning model as a plan generator, and then you hand off the plan to something like Sonnet, like one of the or Gemini that implements it. I'm a little it's like a little unclear to me if that's the way things ought to be working. If this just like I don't think Anthropic really makes a strong distinction between reasoning model and non-reasoning. It's really like how much thinking out loud do you want it to do before it does the thing you asked it to do? Um, so I don't know. Like that's an area of the development of these models that I'm not totally certain what path it will take. I will say, as a user, I don't like the latency, especially if I'm trying to do something interactive with it. If I'm trying to do something where it's more like fire and forget, I think the latency is okay. But the models have kind of gotten slower, even though they have definitely gotten better.
Now you're in a domain where in some ways you can validate what the model is adjusting before you run it, right? So sort of like if I use a LLM to suggest some SQL code for me, I can use the explain for the database, right? So and then I can say, oh,
Correct.
this won't work, right?
Yeah.
So you have an advantage from that perspective, right?
Yeah, this is one of the main things. So there's work on the model side to improve things, and then there's work on the application side. And one of the main things on the application side that we're trying to do is sort of validate, like you said. So like for instance, if we're doing a coding change, we should validate that it compiles, for instance. Or if we're doing SQL, we should validate that it's valid. So like stuff like that is like no brainer. And then the other thing where I think we add a lot of value is in the sort of like access to context and curating the context and getting team context and learning the patterns of users and using that as context. And so, there is a real advantage, I think, right now to being at the application layer, which is why I think you see a bunch of model providers pushing into the application layer, especially in the coding space. Like Anthropic is doing this, OpenAI obviously just bought Windsurf, they're doing this and they're releasing coding products. And so they're trying to move up the stack to where they can actually see where all the context lives and where all the user behavior lives in order to capture some value.
So how does what's the interface for a warp user for the LLM? Is there a drop down where they can pick the model, or you just pick the
Yeah.
model for them?
So this is a great question from a UI standpoint. How should this work? We have a model picker. I kind of am conflicted on the model picker. So part of me thinks like as a
And
user,
who's paying for the inference? The user, right? So
well, yes.
user
So
gives
that's
user gives you their credentials or API key or whatever.
So the primary way it works is that the user pays us and we
Okay.
pay. And so
Okay.
we take a margin on
Okay.
the subscription. That works okay. There definitely are users who want to bring their own API key. There's users who want to just be charged for usage rather than for a subscription, which is our model. And so I think this is another
Oh,
challenge
subscription
at
and then
the
subscription. Some people can overuse it then, right? So
So that's a problem. So we have problems both ways where we have people who pay and they don't fully utilize it, and we have people who pay and they overutilize it and it costs us a lot of money. And the simplest thing would be to go to a pure usage-based model, which is something that we're considering, but then there's disadvantages from a business perspective for us doing that. And so we're trying to find the right pricing model. I think if you look at the other companies in the AI dev tool space, it's still predominantly subscription, but with some people not doing that. It's hard for us to get the pricing right. It's definitely a frustration for our users. For the model picking, we do offer a choice. I feel like it's a weird UI, honestly, to be giving users a choice in the sense of like what I would want personally is just I want the best answer for what I'm doing. I want the model that's going to get my
well,
task done the best.
you need a routing model then, right?
Yeah, and so that in reality, that's what we do on the back end is we use different models for different pieces of the task. So for coding, uses one model. There's for diff application, we have a separate thing that uses some fine tuning, and so there for predictive AI, it's a different model. So it doesn't even really make sense to give users model choice, but a lot of users still like to
I
have the
mean,
model choice to get a feel for like
look at the
how do the different models perform,
look at the persona of your users. They're control freaks for
They're
tech
control freaks.
for tech, right? So they might even want to do the following, which is okay, I'll pick this model. Warp will suggest something. I'll have another model check it,
Totally.
right?
Like these are developers who have like
Yeah.
a tinkerer, hacker,
Yep.
control like mindset. And so that's basically we end up trying to do sensible defaults but give people control is like the product philosophy.
So how come nothing is open source? Is what the listeners will ask. I
Yeah,
guess
so
you have to make money. Is the straight answer, right? So, but
that's I mean we're trying to build a business definitely.
yeah.
That's like at the end of the day part of it. But I think if we thought we could better build a business by it being open source, we would make it open source. And we still may make it open source to be totally honest if we have enough defensible value on the server part of Warp, which we may. I don't think it's a bad idea for us to make it open source. The downside of making it open source is like we do have a very differentiated UX right now and a very differentiated client. And if you look at all of our competitors, literally, I think almost maybe all of them are forks of VS Code, which
Yeah.
is one open source thing. And I wonder if Microsoft would do that, make that same choice because, and I worry that if we open source the Warp UI, we open ourselves up to that same competition, which maybe it's okay, to be honest. But I do think right now we have something very different and there's value in that. And it's a totally from scratch, purpose-built UX that's really great for doing AI tasks. So that's the honest answer. But it's not off the table.
And what's the demographic of the users in terms of geography?
We are, I want to say like 70% US, North America, and Europe, and then 30% or so is spread out across the rest of the world. I think we have users in almost every country. I mean, we have over 500,000 monthly active users now. But it's predominantly North America and Europe. And then when you look at paying customers, it's like probably 90+% North America and Europe.
And then who's more likely to pay, the back end or the front end?
I think like I actually don't know that off the top of my head. I think it's the back end because paying us is highly correlated with depth of AI usage. And so it's really the people who pay us are the people who have most quickly made the change in their habits to start every developer thing they're doing with AI. Like, and it's the more we flip that switch, the more people pay us. But it's not everyone yet. And like, honestly, there's a lot of developers in the world who just want like a great terminal, and I'm totally happy for them to use Warp. It's totally free for them to use Warp. But yeah, the paid part of it is all around AI, and to some lesser extent, it's around enterprise features.
And by the way, I think this warp fits into this overall trend where, you know, how people are saying, oh, the software engineering is dead. Well, I think actually, uh, I guess software engineers who don't learn AI back tools are dead. But
Yeah, that's like a
software,
self-obsoleting
yeah,
attitude. Yeah.
software engineers who are not open to AI enabled tools are dead. But I think the ones who are open will just, I think, they
Yeah,
will
I
flourish.
just
Yeah.
posted something on LinkedIn about this. I mean, when I when I talk to engineering leaders, the the predominant thing that I hear, and maybe this is BS, but it's what I hear is that they view AI as adding engineering capacity. And so they're not looking to replace engineers, they're looking to augment the capacity of their engineering team. Now, at some point, like it's kind of like what's the difference? But I do think today I haven't heard anyone being like, let me replace. And I think that the thing is that there's this infinite almost demand for software in the world that doesn't, I don't see that going down. And so it's kind of like it's just increasing the net ability of the economy to produce software in some way is the impact here. So I don't know. I'm in the camp of this as a tool that helps developers get more done, but we'll see
Yeah,
how it pans out. Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
advice I give people is, you know, learn these tools.
Yes,
If you don't, then you're in trouble.
I couldn't agree more.
And I think actually the trend I'm seeing is the junior developers are fine because they're the ones who are more likely to be open to this. The
Yeah.
senior developers also, it's the ones in between who are a little resistant
Yeah.
you know, they say, oh, that stuff doesn't work, or, you know, I don't want to do that, right?
Yeah, just to drive this point home. So we're likely changing our interview process to evaluate how developers use AI tools. So far from being like it's cheating to use an AI tool when going through our like interview, it's gonna be we want to see how you do it. Like how do you prompt, how do you attach context, how do you approach problem solving when you have this other tool at your disposal? Because I think it's such an important tool for people to learn. So I think if you are an engineer thinking about getting into engineering, like learn how to use these tools is definitely the advice right now.
So I wonder if you guys should partner with some of these coding boot camps
Yeah.
or classes at certain schools, right? So to get your perspective out there. Like you said, uh, I think there's a monoculture in terms of UX right now for AI assisted coding, right? So,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So we're trying, like, I think it's a great idea. We've talked to a bunch of boot camps around doing this, and the the line to walk is that you don't want to replace people's coding knowledge with just knowledge of how to use the AI tools because, well, obviously, because these tools are fallible, and so like,
no, but I mean
yeah,
the thing is,
it should be both. It should be additive.
if
Yeah.
you're at the boot camp, right? So you're learning this tool which allows you to do more than just write software,
Yes.
right? So
Yeah. I mean, you're learning how to produce software, and just part of that is writing it by hand. And like, I think a diminishing part of that. I do think,
no, but
again,
the terminal itself as a tool
yeah,
can do more than your IDE, right? So,
yeah, definitely.
and so you might as well learn a terminal, a modern terminal.
Yeah, you should. I mean, you should learn how to code by prompt in the terminal, or at
The
least I would say Warp
the yeah,
specifically
the
is
only
useful.
thing is
Yeah.
if most of the people on your team use VS Code and then you walk them over, yeah, come over here. Let me show you what I'm doing in Warp.
Yeah.
So, and with that, thank you, Zach.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.